Hello everyone! Today we're taking a look at 1939's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I rewatched it last Friday night, and I wasn't planning to do a whole video on it, but as I typed out my notes, I had way too much for a mini review, so once again, here we are. In this Frank Capra-directed film, a state's political machine finds itself in a pickle when their compliant junior senator abruptly dies in office. They needed his vote to pass a bill which promises to make them a lot of money, so they scramble to find a replacement who won't ask any questions. Enter Jefferson Smith, the leader of the state's boy rangers, whose naivete and inexperience make him the perfect stooge, until he innocently proposes his own bill that threatens their plans. Smith finds himself at odds with his senior senator, his home state, and the entire Congress. The film stars Jimmy Stewart, Jean Arthur, and Claude Rains, alongside a host of familiar faces. I watched this on Tubi, which, in hindsight, wasn't the best choice. It was free, but there were a lot of ads. The movie's already 2 hours and 10 minutes long, plus about 10 ad breaks with 4 to 6 ads each. It was really good to see it again, though. It had been years since I watched it the first time, and there was a lot I had forgotten. It was funnier than I remembered, the performances were even better, and I was impressed by the fact that this movie is 87 years old and things have changed, but a lot is the same. Now let's get a couple things out of the way. Number one, as I have said in the past, I don't want to have political discussions on my channel. That's not what you come here for, and it's not what I come here for, so let's nip that in the bud. Number two, lest you think I'm about to break my own rule, or you're inclined to make assumptions, there is nothing I'm going to say in this video that I wouldn't have said 4 years ago and that I wouldn't say 4 years from now. When I say a lot is the same, I am speaking generally about the whole kit and caboodle. Most of us can agree on certain broad statements. Politicians tend to say one thing and do another. Greed and corruption run rampant in both state and federal government. Most of the media is shamelessly biased, etc., etc. As divided as we are, we're in accord on these things. Until we start naming names. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was directed by a staunch conservative, while the screenplay was adapted by a liberal, then communist Sidney Buckman. Their politics clashed, but the film they made together wisely leaves out any labels, resulting in a story that is refreshingly universal. It was then, and it still is today. Viewers are free to interpret it any way they want, because no political affiliations are specified. We don't even know what state Jefferson Smith hails from, although Lewis R. Foster's original short story was titled The Gentleman from Montana. This generalization prevents the film from polarizing half its audience, but it also insinuates that it doesn't really matter, because the compromising of one's ideals in favor of personal gain is a bipartisan problem. Not all politicians are guilty of it, but politicians from all parties have done it. Now let's move on to what I really want to talk about, the cast. As the idealistic young underdog, Jimmy Stewart gives one of his best performances. I know I said recently that I thought his role as the father in 1965's Shenandoah was one of his best. I promise I don't just say that about every Jimmy Stewart performance I see. He was 31 here, hadn't had many starring roles up to this point, and obviously this is before he went to war. Because we know more about his combat experiences and how heavily they weighed on him, I think we're tempted to examine his body of work through that lens, as if his PTSD was fueling the unique fire and ferocity found in so many of his performances. And it is true in certain cases. But Mr. Smith came before all that, and we see the same traits that characterized his later style. The awkward, aw-shucks guy who gets pushed too far, the righteous indignation, the quivering rage. His ability to tap into those darker feelings may have been accentuated by his military experience, but it was already there. I definitely think he could have won the Best Actor Oscar for Mr. Smith. If it had been any other year, he would have been a shoo-in. Famously, Hollywood produced an astonishing number of amazing movies in 1939. I've reviewed some of them. Mr. Smith, I keep wanting to say Mr. Stewart. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington received 11 nominations, which is huge, but it was a notoriously tough year. Stewart was nominated for Best Actor, and if it had been me voting, I probably would have pushed for a three-way tie. I would give it to Stewart, but I also love Robert Donat, so I am glad he won for Goodbye Mr. Chips, and I think Clark Gable was great in Gone with the Wind. Stewart did win the following year for The Philadelphia Story, and I do enjoy his acerbic comedic turn in that, but Mr. Smith was clearly the more deserving performance, and this isn't just my opinion. The general consensus is that the Academy, up to their usual shenanigans, again, not much has changed, gave him the Oscar for The Philadelphia Story as a consolation prize. Like, oops, sorry, you should have gotten this last year. Jimmy Stewart himself felt that this was the case. I view this as the first great example of Stewart's everyman persona. He's very natural on screen, especially in the scene where he's talking to Susan Payne on the phone and fidgeting and fumbling with anything in reach. That was ridiculously relatable. And I love the scene where he and Miss Saunders write the bill. It's a great sequence for Jean Arthur as well, as his glowing talk about home makes her long for an existence that's completely foreign to her. And then he asks where she comes from, and they have this light exchange about her name and what he's supposed to call her. It's not overt flirtatious banter, it's just a casual, fun back and forth, like a real conversation these two acquaintances are having. He also brings the character's idealism to life without making him look like a fool. Well, he does suffer some embarrassment, and we laugh, but ultimately we root for him. We may even feel a little envious of his pure, untainted ideals, his unabashed love of country, and his unwavering moral compass. Capra includes a montage that celebrates the history of the United States via a tour of monuments and statues in the Capitol. Smith is enamored with all these sites, and yes, his patriotic enthusiasm is a little over the top, but I have to agree, the buildings in DC are beautiful, especially at night when they're all lit up, and these things do mean something, and as Smith reverently tours the city, his awe is infectious, and yeah, there was a point during that montage when I was moved. And what's inspiring about the film and the character is that when he suffers total disillusionment, instead of running back home, he chooses to double down. He takes up the lonely but noble fight against corruption and graft, and the very traits that people scorn strengthen his determination not to quit. The most famous part of the movie is the filibuster. I love the filibuster as it's depicted here, a true test of a senator's mettle and endurance, where he's required to stand up on the Senate floor and talk for as long as he's able, yielding only for questions. Filibusters used to be really exciting, and then they changed the rules and took all the drama and the hard work out of it. This section alone should have clinched the Oscar. The strain, the coughing, the whispering, the pure exhaustion and desperation. My vocal cords feel strained in solidarity. I think about how awful I feel after I've filmed an extra long video and I've been going for 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I think my record is like 5 or 6 in one day. And I think about how awful that feels, how just gross your vocal cords are, and how you don't want to talk for the rest of the day, and you sound terrible, and then I just multiply that, and ugh. As I mentioned, the leading lady is Jean Arthur, with whom Stewart worked the previous year on Capra's You Can't Take It With You. She was a Capra favorite, and Stewart also called her the finest actress he ever worked with, praising her excellent comedic timing. Arthur is great here as the worldly wise secretary Smith inherits with the office, and though the film revolves around him, she has several strong monologues, like when she tells him to go on home, or when she bucks him up at the Lincoln Memorial. This woman knows what's what in Washington. She's been around for a long time, and she is fed up with the whole apparatus. But she feels protective of Smith. She doesn't want that dreamy light in his eye to be snuffed out, and she fears that he's going to be devoured by the wolves. She realizes that he represents something pure that needs to be kept safe. One of my favorite actors, Claude Rains, plays white-haired, bespectacled Joseph Payne, the senior senator who becomes Smith's chief antagonist. He seems like a kind, generous man, especially when he realizes that he worked closely with Smith's late father. This makes his betrayal even more shocking. Rains was often cast in villainous roles, it's something he excelled at, but this one's a little different. Often his bad guys delight in their wickedness, sowing seeds of discord with glee. But Senator Payne stands out because of his self-loathing. His fatal flaw is his ambition, which leads him to sacrifice his own ideals. And when faced with exposure and the possibility of losing his shot at the presidency, he resorts to that insidious tactic of accusing your opponent of committing the very crime that you yourself are guilty of, and doing it in the loudest, most self-righteous tones. But once he's thrown Smith under the bus, it seems he can't look him in the eye. Maybe this is just me, but I noticed that after he betrays Smith, it seems like his glasses reflect the light more. It could be accidental, but you know how filmmakers are. The eyes are considered the window to the soul. Here's Payne being duplicitous, and as he levels this baseless accusation against Smith, the glare keeps obscuring his eyes. If they did it on purpose, that was a clever little touch. I think the cast is actually my favorite thing about this movie, combining brilliant stars and some of the best character actors of the time. Edward Arnold plays Jim Taylor, the man running the political machine. I often enjoy him. Not the same way I enjoy Claude Rains, but he was another solid character actor, good at playing heavies, and surprisingly fun in rare wholesome performances, which this isn't. There is one area where I think Capra went a bit far, and that's when Taylor sends his men out to bully Smith's paperboys and prevent them from delivering Smith's side of the story. When it went from plain old intimidation to ramming kids off the road and abusing them, I don't know, that felt manipulative. And the montage where Smith goes around punching the reporters who deliberately misquoted him, that was a little weird too. It's humorous and kind of satisfying, but not at all believable. Another favorite of mine, Thomas Mitchell, plays Jean Arthur's reporter buddy. Saunders and Diz hang out together, he listens to her rants, he would marry her if she'd let him. I love Thomas Mitchell in this. I had forgotten how entertaining he is here, and as usual, I've got to point out that he had prominent supporting roles in 5 great movies released in 1939. One was Howard Hawks' Only Angels Have Wings, which also co-starred Jean Arthur, and they share a couple good scenes in that, but they're a really great pair here. I love their interactions so much that I wish they had done a 3rd movie together. Not necessarily as a romantic pairing, but just as leads. Maybe a comedic mystery thriller where they have to solve a crime together or something. We also have Eugene Pallett as another part of the political machine. It's always fun when he turns up, and he has some really good lines and bits here, as does Guy Kibbe as the spineless governor who gets pushed around by Jim Taylor, and also his own horde of offspring. Beulah Bondi appears as Stewart's mother, a role she basically reprised later in Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, where, oh yeah, Thomas Mitchell plays Stewart's Uncle Billy. And Jack Carson, who would work for Capra in Arsenic and Old Lace, has a small role as another reporter. But watching this movie again, I realized I have a new favorite character, the President of the Senate, played by Harry Carey. I didn't even remember he was in this movie, and I happened to not see the screen when his name appeared in the main titles, so it was a shock when he showed up, and it's strange to see him in something that isn't a Western. But I absolutely adored his performance. Though he tries to hide it because he runs a tight ship, it's clear he's amused by Smith's ardor, optimism, and awkwardness. And when Smith's future rests in his hands, he decides to give him a fair shot. I love his reaction when he becomes aware that Smith is being coached by Saunders up in the press gallery. And then when Smith is on the brink of despair, he's the one who gives him a warm smile of encouragement. I wanted to just reach through the screen and hug him. You know, sometimes you're watching a movie and it's really good, you're enjoying it, and then some little thing comes along that just nudges it over the edge for you. In this instance, Harry Carey was the cherry on top. And those are my thoughts on Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I hope you enjoyed this review. I'm curious to see what kind of response I get in the comments. Things got a little feisty last week with Jason and the Argonauts. So let me know what you think about this movie in the comments below, and I'll be back next Saturday. Thanks for watching.